Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the land on which we meet today and pay my respect to their elder, past, and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Then I pay my special respect to all the fallen heroes from Spring Revolution in Myanmar. I also thank AMI President Christopher Len for our meeting and our presenter, Professor Yanghee and Samuel. I really appreciate all our participants from different parts of the world to join AMI seminar today under the bad weather. Our AMI President, Christopher Len, will open the meeting. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, May Chair, and it is also a very great honor for me to be able to be here for a meeting with somebody as distinguished as Professor Yanghee Lee to be the main speaker. And she will talk about the things that you've seen in the website and the advertisement, but looking at the way human rights and governance are being handled in the country these years after the military takeover. And I must say that in looking at the governance, it's also great to see that among our company today, Professor Lee, is Dr. Turong Shui, who is the representative of the NUG in Australia. He's based in Canberra, and it's good to have him here too. So without further ado, let us start. Professor Yanghee Lee will speak first, and then she'll be followed by Samuel, who's not further identified for his own security reasons. Professor Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris, for having me. It's such an honor to be here today. Minglava to all my Myanmar brothers and sisters. Let me just give you a brief background of when I started my mandate and through which time I was the Special Rapporteur. My mandate started in 2014 and ended in spring of 2020. And it was the time when President Thein Sein was elected. And this president set out to, quote unquote, transform Myanmar and open up Myanmar. There was so-called cautious optimism, I would say, during that time. Many of us felt that maybe, perhaps, Myanmar might be on the road to transformation. But he did this because economically he had to open up Myanmar because after Cyclone Nargis, etc., the economy of Myanmar was plummeting. Then came the 2015 elections when the NLD won with a landslide. This brought such high hopes for Myanmar and its people. However, it was in 2016 and 2017 the world witnessed the worst atrocity, genocide of the Rohingya. I will not go into that as it will take hours, even days, for me to speak to you of what I witnessed, personally witnessed. Unfortunately, it was Aung San Suu Kyi, who had been a friend in the past, that actually declared me persona non grata in December of 2017, and I was not allowed into Myanmar anymore. It has been 2 years and 8 months since Min Aung Hlaing attempted a military coup in Myanmar. I say attempted because the coup has failed. The Myanmar people, through their ongoing acts of resistance, have all but ensured that Min Aung Hlaing's junta has not been able to complete the coup and take control of Myanmar. Long-held international assumptions that the junta will always succeed and return Myanmar to the military-run order proved to be wrong. Nowhere in the world do you see people fiercely fighting back for nearly 3 years after a coup attempt. The mass street demonstrations, boycotts, and strikes that erupted in the weeks following the coup attempt were critical to denying the junta the ability to consolidate control early on. When the junta responded to these peaceful acts of resistance with extreme violence, the people were forced to mobilize in armed defense. This quickly evolved into a nationwide struggle to fully liberate the country from military dictatorship once and for all. The military junta is not a legitimate or de facto government. The junta is unable to carry out the role of government. It lacks legitimacy, and it is losing control of territory at an increasingly alarming rate. Territorial control in Myanmar can be divided into three broad categories. The military and its proxy militia on the one side, the NUG alliance of resistance groups on the other side, and more autonomous groups such as the Arakan Army and the United Wa State Army on another side. Territories in all of the ethnic states held by NUG-aligned and non-aligned EROs, ethnic resistance organizations, or what we'd like to call them ethnic revolutionary organizations, that existed before the coup have expanded. The PDFs, People's Defense Forces, which emerged in response to the junta's campaign of violence, act under the NUG, are also contesting territory in the west, northwest, east, and southeast of Myanmar, as well as in central Saigon and Magwe regions, the Bama heartlands, where the military has traditionally been unchallenged. Joint operations between EROs and PDFs are challenging the junta more than ever. Across much of the country, particularly in Chin State in the west, Kachin in the north, and Karenni and Karen in the southeast, the junta has lost control of major roads, meaning its convoys can no longer travel safely outside of the limited areas. In many instances, the junta is having to resort to airlifting supplies by helicopter to its remaining bases and the border regions. In Tanutari region, there are now daily attacks by the PDF and EROs against the junta along the major roads, including the highway linking Myanmar and Thailand. Last Friday, the launch of coordinated operations against the junta by the NDAA, TNLA, and the AA, the so-called Northern Brotherhood Alliance, has seen the junta lose control of dozens of bases in rapid succession across northern Shan State on northeast Myanmar. Transport arteries critical for trade with China, including as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and linking China to Myanmar's second largest city of Mandalay, have been sieged by the EROs and PDFs. These attacks are unprecedented in their scale and in the level of coordination demonstrated by EROs and PDFs, and there is a high likelihood that northern Shan State will become a major front in the conflict as the junta tries to reassert itself. Moving from security to service provision and governance, the junta's action since February 2021 in its attempt to seize control of the central state apparatus by force, combined with the impact of the civil disobedience movement and boycotts, have brought the central state administration to near collapse. Total collapse, that is. The junta is incapable of governing for a growing percentage of the population. The functions of local government are being administered by a network of ERO governance departments, many of which have existed for decades. In areas where there is little or no traditional ERO presence, these services are being administered by newer community-led administrative bodies that have been formed both in direct coordination with the NUG and EROs and independently. One example of this can be seen in the Northeast, where the Karen National Union, KNU, and its allies have expanded control of territory since the coup began. In that time, the junta has lost control over 370 schools, which are now governed by the KNU's Education Department. In that same time, the Karen Education and Culture Department schools have almost tripled to over 900. Broadly speaking, these administrative structures are connecting across the local, township, state, regional, and national level to form a complex structure of interim governance. The NUCC, National Unity Consultative Council, a forum made up of Myanmar's democratic stakeholders, including the NUG, EROs, CSOs, and state-level ethnic councils, guides a movement that aims to establish a new federal democracy, and to this end has produced an interim federal democratic charter. The FDC provides the clearest political roadmap for building a genuine federal democratic constitution since Myanmar's independence. Interim governing councils have been established in most ethnic states and territories as promising platforms for dialogue among resistance actors. Recently, Karenni State was the first ethnic state to establish a full interim governing body following the attempted coup. In Saigon, the recent formation of the Saigon Forum involving 73 revolutionary groups from 28 townships is seen as an important step towards unifying resistance groups in the region and establishing a federal unit that could one day exist within a federal democratic system in Myanmar. Across the country, these varied systems of governance have been a lifeline for millions of people, including growing numbers seeking refuge from junta attacks in resistance areas who depend on them for life-saving humanitarian assistance. While these decentralized network does not yet meet the legal criteria of having effective control over the country, these bodies and systems are becoming increasingly formalized at the local, state, and federal level and are an established fact of today's Myanmar. Of course, there are massive challenges. The junta is committing widespread and systematic grave human rights violations. As the junta has lost control on the ground in favor of the resistance, its human rights atrocities against civilians have escalated. This year, as ground operations have become increasingly difficult, the junta is falling back on its air assets and artillery to indiscriminately bombard civilian targets. There were an average of 30 junta airstrikes per month in Myanmar in the first 6 months of 2023, with an estimated 85% of casualties being civilians. Much of the time, the junta deliberately targets schools, hospitals, and churches to cause maximum civilian suffering. Earlier this month, 29 people were killed, including 11 children, in Kachin State in a junta airstrike against a camp for internally displaced people who were already seeking refuge from the junta's violence. In April, a junta airstrike targeted a gathering of villagers that had assembled for the opening of an NUG administration office in Saigon region. The attack killed 165 people. In both cases, it appears the junta used a fuel-air explosive bomb or a thermobaric bomb. These bombs are known as volumetric weapons, designed to create destruction on a massive scale. These weapons completely destroy built structures. The impact they have on the human body is catastrophic. Any use of these indiscriminate volumetric weapons in civilian areas is likely to create international humanitarian law and constitute a crime against humanity and/or a war crime. The junta has concentrated much of its barbaric violence on civilians in the dry zone regions of Saigon and Magway, the epicenter of Burma's resistance. Ground operations commonly include massacre and extrajudicial killings, rape, torture, mutilation, and arson. Arson attacks by the junta and its proxies have seen an estimated 75,000 civilian homes burned to the ground since the coup began, much like what happened in 2016 and 2017 against the Rohingya. ACLED data shows that up until this month's developments in the Middle East, the conflict in Myanmar was the most intense in terms of violent incidents in the world. At the same time as committing human rights violations through the use of extreme violence, the junta is further violating human rights by deliberately creating and maintaining a humanitarian crisis through the international widespread and systematic deprivation, intentional widespread and systematic deprivation of basic human needs, food, water, shelter, medicine, and subsequently denying international humanitarian access to the areas targeted. Union Line has one single goal: outright military rule. This is something he's prepared to pursue no matter how many people he kills or how much destruction he causes. And yet, many in the international community continue to engage with the junta on the grounds that it is a rational actor working towards anything besides its own brutal interests. Meanwhile, calls by the NUG and its ERO allies for recognition, for collaboration in the provision of humanitarian assistance, and for support of its political project continue to be ignored. Russia, China, India continue to supply the junta war machine with fighter jets, attack helicopters, and arms. There are dozens of other countries providing the junta with dual-use technology parts, machines, and raw materials that the junta needs to create small and light arms inside Myanmar at its network of Kapasal weapons factory. Earlier at SACAM, we did a thorough research paper on the supply chain of all the supplies that go into the makings of the small light arm and military ammunitions in the Kapasal factories. And this year we'll follow up with a more detailed research into the aftermath or the end result of these Kapasal weapons. Despite the junta's violent actions having destroyed the economy and forced 50% of the population into poverty, it still has access to major financial lifelines, such as the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise, MOGI. The United States and the UK have not yet followed the EU in sanctioning MOGI, which brings the junta over $1 billion a year in revenues. These funds have continued to flow directly to the junta for the purchase of weapons that it then uses to commit atrocities against civilians. What needs to be done? The Myanmar people, have been utterly let down by the international system. They feel betrayed. But there are concrete actions states can and must take in support of the Myanmar people. SACAM has been pushing for a global fleet cut strategy against the junta. First, cut the weapon. Cut the cash. Second, cut the cash. Third, cut the impunity. This means imposing a global arms embargo to cut off the junta's access to arms as well as dual-use goods, weapon parts and technology, raw materials. It needs to maintain weapon production inside Myanmar. Cutting off the import of aviation fuel to Myanmar is critical. Cut the junta's access to the funds that fuel its war machine through targeted financial sanctions against Myanmar junta leaders, state-owned enterprises, and affiliated crony companies. The big prize here is MOGE and military-controlled banks. Cutting the impunity means ending the cycle of military impunity that has plagued Myanmar for more than 60 years. The UN Security Council must refer the situation in Myanmar to the ICC, and states must also support ongoing accountability efforts at the ICC. Alternatively, the ICC should act on the NUG's Article 12.3 declaration, which grants its jurisdiction to prosecute all international crimes committed inside Myanmar dating back to 2002, including the full scope of the alleged crimes committed against the Rohingya. If the Security Council can't or won't act, the UN member states must take action too, through the General Assembly, and pass an urgent resolution on Myanmar during this current 78th session. General Assembly resolutions are not binding, of course, so like-minded states who are aligned on Myanmar must be prepared to take action to impose these sanctions in a coordinated and strategic way that has the most impact. The international community, major donors, and the UN must urgently rethink humanitarian strategy on Myanmar, as the current failed approach of seeking humanitarian access solely through the junta and channeling aid through Yangon is not reaching those in need. A localized, cross-border humanitarian response from Thailand, India, and even by sea is the most effective means of delivering aid to the millions of people in need. Donors and UN entities should work directly with the resistance authorities to support the established civil society networks that have been working tirelessly to provide relief since the coup began. The NUG and EROs have consistently called for the UN to extend direct partnership to them to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian relief across Myanmar's land borders. It's time the community, international community, including UN agencies and ASEAN, acted on these calls. The world must come to terms with the reality of what is happening in Myanmar and provide support to those democratic entities that represent the will of its people. This requires ending engagement with the military and publicly engaging with and supporting resistance entities who serve as the best chance of achieving stability, peace, through a genuine federal democratic Myanmar. The NUG is the most inclusive government in Myanmar's history. Myanmar's federal democratic future is already being built. Yes, there are immense challenges ahead. Progress will not be linear and it will not be easy, and there will be inevitable setbacks. But the resistance is united in its goal of achieving a federal democratic Myanmar. We see a time when the people of Myanmar will see this dream become a reality. And it's time for the international community to let the people of Myanmar realize their dreams. Don't you think so? Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Yanghee. That was really interesting and really good. And I join Joe LaBianca with the applause that he just offered you. It's really interesting to hear what you've had to say, and I'm sure we will have a lot of questions later on. But for now, we turn to Samuel. But before going to him, let me just say to everybody, please put any questions you have into the chat room so that we can consolidate them for the speakers when the time comes. Samuel, are you ready?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, AMI, for inviting me to share a panel with Professor Lee. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge the ongoing gravity of the situation in Myanmar, and I also want to express solidarity and support for the people of Myanmar for their bravery and struggle for freedom, democracy, and self-determination. So as a commentator of this session, I would like to draw and highlight two key important points of the presentation and also elaborate on this. One is the SAC, the military, cannot or will not be able to defeat the resistant group, both EAO and the PDF, through the military means. That also means that there has been increasing territory control, as Professor Lee already mentioned, under the new governance set up by the PDF LDF and also the EAO, who are fighting alongside with these new resistant groups. And this also means that the junta is not as strong as many people believe, or they are losing grips in many places. And the second point is that why this decisive military victory is less likely to happen in Myanmar, like many other civil conflict after the Cold War, a negotiated settlements or diplomatic approach to the ongoing conflict with the current military junta in the table is not a solution either. Any push for the political dialogue or negotiate that settlement is almost starting to fail in the current conditions. So the revolutionary actor, including the NUG, the EAO, ERO, engaging in the conflict, they know this very well. They know that they cannot have a power-sharing settlement with the junta. The NCA process and 21st Century Penlong Conference in the past decade are the proof of this. The coup has ended the process, the answers of the entire agreements. Therefore, they want to push harder. They want to push more pressure on the military generals. They know for the fact that how political dialogue and negotiation settlement could be with the junta through this NCA process. It doesn't also mean that negotiated settlement is something that is not possible in Myanmar. There is a chance for the political negotiation to end the conflict. The NUG minister and many several EAO leadership, they publicly talk about it. But they also make it clear that not with this SAC leader, not in the situation where the SAC is targeting civilian as a collective punishment. denying the rights of ethnic nationality, or insisting on controlling the country one way or another. So as long as these conditions are not met, there will be no dialogue. Any effort to push for dialogue or negotiated settlement will fail, for sure. So regarding my first point, I would like to give a short brief about newly emerged local governance and situation unfolding in some region, mainly focusing on the Burma-dominated area. So as many of us are aware, we have seen a new surge of resistance movement in Burma-dominated area like Sakai and Magway. One of the gender powerful tools throughout the history is the creating division across ethnicity and identity. It has failed significantly in the Spring Revolution. The resistance movement in Burma-dominated area are the proof of it. More than 1,000 days of the uprising, we have seen a clear picture. The Burma people also want to end the dictatorship once and for all, and they also envision about being a part of the future democratic state. So since the coup, gender forces have been targeted frequently almost everywhere in those regions. According to several sources, including the NUG and including many data like ECLEC, in the 2023 years alone, we have seen more than 1,000 clashes in Magway and region, and more than 5,000 against the junta after the coups. So if we combine other regions of the country that have large Burma populations, such as Mandalay, Bago, Rangoon, there are more than 7,000 attacks against the junta troops. This is very crystal clear that what the Burma people want, along with the ethnic peoples. This state could claim thousands of troops and it allied forces like Pusorti, local militias, and more than 10,000 soldier and police defections. And moreover, the NUG and it allies ER could also attract thousands of volunteers to join their forces. It is estimated at least 50,000 volunteers have already received military training by the NUG, ERO, and the PDF themselves since the coup. So there are more than 300 PDF battalion has been formed with more than 20,000 troops across the country. And the NUG also established a group like Pakapa, Pidukakwe, which is also translated into as PDF in Burmese. It's more than 20. It is established in more than 250 townships as it's part of People Militia strategy. NUG also initiated like People Administrative Team, Pa'apa, and People Security Team, Palapa, which are formed with members from 3 stakeholders, members of parliament, CDM civil servant, and their representative, and are also a relevant local leader, village leader, so to fill the administrative vacuum and the law enforcement. So according to the NUG, more than 100 township level, Pakapa has been operating across the country, and they could raise approximately 18 million USD from taxation in Sakai alone. So that's a lot of money. This also state that they have gained a lot of popular support in the ground. And there are around 70 hospital, 200 mobile clinic, and 100 school under the NUG administration. This is also a clear evidence that the resistance forces are gaining control on the ground, and they are enjoying the support of the population, even in the conflict zones. So this is not surprising for Myanmar people, because this resistance movement, this administrative group, defense forces are largely grassroots-led movement. So the recent conflict in northern Shan State, as Professor Lee already described, which is dubbed as Operation 1027, is another clear indication that SAC is losing its control, and there have been strong alliance and trust have been built between the long-established EAO and newly emerged resistance group like PDF. So the public discourse on the social media about this operation in the past 48 hours, 72 hours, also described that the resistance movement has not dried out over time, as many people expected. there is a strong will and determination to end the dictatorships. But unfortunately, the junta also adopted a new tactic and apply more aggressive tactic like airstrike. We are seeing more frequent airstrike against the IDP camp, the NUG, and the local Defense for Public Administration mechanism. The NUG increasingly conducting airstrike on the refugee camp, school, and hospital run by the many resistant groups. Notably, the junta helicopter gunship attack against a school in Dipaying Township, which killed 13 people, including 7 kids. And there is also attack in Chin State, in the high school in Weibula town, that killed headmaster, the teacher, and many other civilians. There are many incidents like that. There's also attack on the headquarters of the group as well. So unfortunately, the conflict in Myanmar has not ripe yet, and many several factors suggest that Myanmar is still in the early stage of the conflict and not in the later one that tend to encourage serious negotiation. So the socio-economic situation, that the human rights condition are getting worse. The country is facing its worst humanitarian crisis in modern history. For instance, the UNHCR mentioned that 7.8 million children are still out of the school, and at least 260 school and education personnel were attacked after the coups. So along with Ukraine and Burkina Faso, Myanmar is one of the countries that the educational personnel has been attacked frequently in the country. So there is no immediate remedy for this unless the junta itself stop its collective punishment upon civilian, weaponizing humanitarian aid and support. There should be more pressure from the international community, like the Professor Lee suggested. There's several ways to do it, especially ASEAN neighboring country and a powerful regional country like Australia. They could do a lot more, and they could put more pressure on the SAC for neglecting this humanitarian situation. And at the same time, they could provide more support for a humanitarian plus approach. For example, 3 EAO groups, KNPP, KNU, CNF, they demanded implementations of no-fly zone, internationally guaranteed protection of safe zone, and negotiated humanitarian corridor. These approaches are possible if there is a strong determination from the international community. The people of Burma are very saddened and feel hopeless when they see how the whole world stand together with the Ukraine and not with them. The nature and origin of the conflict are different, of course, but the suffering of the innocent civilian are the same. So there could be more collective approach and dedication for the people of Burma because they deserve more. So I will end my comment here. We will have more time for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you very much. Well, we've had 2 really interesting presentations, and I think it would be great now to go back to the questions. Before we go into the questions put by the different people, I want to follow up one of the things that was said by Professor Lee. It has to do with the range of the conflict now, and what you said and then what Samuel said about the process of this conflict. It seems to be pretty clear to most of us watching it that the military cannot win. They can continue to inflict great damage on the population, but they will not win a war that gives them the support of the people and a continuing life for the military as the government of Myanmar. If that's so, what do you see, Professor Lee, and your colleagues in the other SAC? It's a pity you have 2 SACs in looking at Myanmar these days. Your colleagues in the SAC, whom you've just been with in the US at meetings, what do you see as the future of this conflict?
Thank you for the question. We are not the other SIC. We are SAC-M.
M. Yeah, that's right.
M.
Yes.
And in other words, people joke to us, they say, "Oh, you want to sack them," so that's easier for you to remember. Sack the junta, sack them.
Good.
Yes, we're afraid that it's going to take longer than everybody ever anticipated. That's because of the international inaction. Both sides are going to bleed out. I'm being very honest. Without international action, the junta is going to become more fierce. The opposition, the resistance, will also have to defend themselves, and they will have to become fierce and inflict damage on the military. So if it protracts, then there's going to be a lot more human capital destruction, as well as physical destruction and economic destruction in Myanmar. And this is why the international community must respond very urgently in a targeted, in a concerted way. They must coordinate themselves too. And put countries like Australia should, and my country too, South Korea, should leverage ASEAN countries to do more. The ASEAN centrality and the principle of non-difference should not apply in this situation. When I was a special rapporteur and talking to ASEAN diplomats and ambassadors, I continuously would say, change your principle of non-interference to the principle of non-indifference. That should be the centrality of ASEAN. But ASEAN is split. Now you have Myanmar, you have Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines on the one side, and the others on the other side. But then again, many of the ASEAN countries are military background countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Just giving him a little bit of warning, Dr. Turong Shui, we might get a comment from you in a minute or two about the things that have just been said and about the place of NUG in these issues, but we'll go back to the other questions that there have been so far. Several questions were about the minimal action being undertaken by the international community. And sad as it is, it could be interpreted as being understandable given the amount of distraction there is at the moment because of the situation in Gaza, the situation in Ukraine, the situation in Afghanistan, which is also turning into a forgotten conflict for a lot of people. How do you think, realistically, and you know the UN very well, Professor Lee, realistically, how do you think that it's going to be possible to get the UN, including the ICC for that matter, to undertake the kinds of things that you've said are so important? It looks to me to be very difficult.
Well, if the UN can't act, and countries have acted bilaterally, EU has acted bilaterally, UK, France and others, and US, with the new Burma Act, they've really gotten strong in terms of sanctions. Not just, we advocate not only sanctioning personalities in the oil and gas enterprise. And when I was just in DC, this is what we would advocate for. They have sanctioned some of the personalities of the generals in the MOGE, but we would rather see US sanction MOGE as an entity, as the UK has done, as the EU has done. Because, as I said, it's $1 billion of revenue going into the military annually. So more targeted sanctions would be the case, and there has been development. We've done a paper recently on UN engagement, in which we really dissected the UN, the layers of the UN, and it's on our website. We have an executive summary in Burmese, and we show how ineffective the UN has been. But despite all that, having said that, for the first time in history, the Security Council came out with a resolution last year. The General Assembly had a resolution. And more countries of the Security Council should not be afraid of the veto power. Now there is this Liechtenstein's initiative, where if there is a veto in the Security Council, then it has to explain itself, and it goes down to the General Assembly to talk about it. So that's a little bit of a development. To the work of all the people, credit goes to the work of the many Burmese CSOs, many scholars, many people like you, Ambassador Christopher, and others. We were able to get a resolution from the Security Council and a resolution of the GA. We would like to see, the GA resolution is 2 years old, the flow of arms. We would like to see another resolution as an update, because things have changed. And in the General Assembly and at the Security Council, there's still talk of, UK is the pen holder, and there's still talk of a resolution coming out of the Security Council, and we're still pushing for that. This is where we are so far.
Thank you.
I hope it answered your question.
It goes well towards more questions which will come on this topic, so that's good. Thank you. And we'll come back to Chuang Shui on one of those too later on. But for now, Samuel, what can you tell us further about the amount of unity there is now between the various PDFs, the different ethnic armed groups, and the others? Are they able to present a united front that the military must take notice of, or are they still, what the military would have hoped, generally disunited?
Yeah. There are many groups, right? Many PDF. Some data indicate there are more than 400. Some indicate 600. And we already have about 20 EAO groups already. So it's really hard. It is nearly impossible to have all the unified front. But many of the PDF are now, they are evolving, like they are joining the NUG command and control. They are all, many EAO also helping the building the command and control of the NUG. And you will see the recent attack on the northern Shan State is very clear example. Many PDF also involving. It is not I don't think it is not important how many groups involved. It is what important is that how they are collaborating each other, how they are effectively working together. I think that is more important.
Okay, thank you. And one further thing on that, which relates to these groups. Most of these groups, of course, are in the states which are close to the borders with the neighboring countries. We see a lot and hear a lot about the Shan states and China. We hear less about the situation in the Chin and Sagaing areas and India. How do you see the relationship between India and these various armed groups along that border area?
Yeah, I think if we talk about India, we can we have to differentiate whether the state government or the union governments. So the Mizoram government have been very supportive toward the Chin peoples and also the refugee, but not the central government, unfortunately. So we don't see much pressure from the India, and we don't see much support on the ground as well. So there have been situation is very different, and then the humanitarian support, as far as I can reach and I can talk to people, we don't see much support getting in those areas. So I think that is one thing that Australia or also ASEAN, they can also improve in those areas, because Chin State and the Sagaing is very important. There's many people in the conflict zone and many IDP refugees like thousands of them are there. So if they can help from that area, many people can get support. This area, they don't have armed conflict for decades. They don't have experience. I think they suffer a lot more. So they need the assistance more than ever.
Okay, thank you. Now, I learned that Dr. Tong Shui is also in another meeting, so he's got to split himself between several different meetings. But one of the questions that he has sent to us is addressed to you, Professor Lee. What's your perspective on the international community's involvement in the transitional phase outlined in the 12-step political roadmap? Do you see it possible for the international community to play a significant role in supporting Myanmar reaching this phase?
Of course, the international community must play a role, a significant role, as Dr. Tun Aung Sui indicates. But I think the transition or the decision to how the future will unfold should be based on the will of the people, of all the stakeholders. As Sam said earlier, no political dialogue should be. If I heard you right, political dialogue or sitting at the same table with the junta should not be rushed in or recommended. But this is also something for forums like NUCC, the National Unity Consultative Group Council, should discuss. But this is an emergency period. It shouldn't be carried on as business as usual. Things should be streamlined from the Myanmar side too, to make quick decisions for a roadmap, and to make decisions, concerted decisions, for what the people would really like for the future of Myanmar. And from what I gather from my contacts who are still in country, they do want the federal democratic Myanmar. And this is the first time that EROs or EAOs, as we commonly know them as, have aligned with the NUG or the Bama people. It's the first time in 70 years that they've aligned with the Bama people or the NLD. And I really get very upset when media present Myanmar or the NUG as government in exile or the shadow government. They are not a shadow government, and they're not an exile government as it was once many decades ago. The prime minister is in country. The acting president is in country, and some ministers are in country too. So you cannot say that it is a government in exile.
Thank you. I must say that some of us make exactly the same point. They're not a government in exile, and they're not a shadow. You could argue that they're an alternative government, perhaps, or that they have areas of control in which they exercise full power. And in that respect, in your understanding of the human rights situation, have you been able to see anything of the human rights situation in the areas which they control, NUG controls?
Yes, and they have been taking very quick actions. For instance, if a PDF has violated a code of conduct, that has been addressed very quickly. And for the first time, they have a Ministry of Human Rights, which it was never there, or the idea of having it was never there. And for the first time in Myanmar's independent history, that the deputy of the Ministry of Human Rights is a Rohingya himself.
That's right. There are two deputies, and we've had
Yes.
quite a lot of contact with the other one, who we are able to see quite easily. But in terms of the Rohingya point, do you have any comment, and do you, Samuel, too, have any comment on the place of the Rohingya in the NUG, and how that's going to work in the long haul? Is the public in the country accepting of this, or have they bought the propaganda line that's been fed to them for many years about who the Rohingya are not?
Sam, do you want to go ahead with this first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that is very interesting that after the coup we see a lot of like this movement. You will see many young people are leading, young people are at the forefront. So they also have this kind of new idea. They have been challenging all the conservative the narratives. So they are very seeing positive. We are seeing very positive sign of that. So when we have the Rohingya as a deputy minister, there is not much criticism about the people are welcoming. And now also there is a minister that apologizing what they have said before the during the genocide. So we and young people, there are many on the social media. The public discourse is changed immediately after the coups.
Right.
I would say the same thing along with Sam. I have been criticized very in the worst terminology ever and caricatures of myself on social media during my mandate. But immediately after the coup, I saw a long list of people coming forward apologizing to me in public on social media for the things that they have said and things they have done, actually, because of the propaganda. Human rights is for everyone. And the people now really understand that if my rights are important, your rights are important too. And that includes not only Rohingya, but all other ethnic minorities too, that are not recognized, have not been recognized under the 1982 citizenship law. And the citizenship law will be abolished. There is a policy paper, and now I understand the NUG is taking concrete steps to abolish the 1982 citizenship law.
Good. Now, let me see. Dr. Tong Shui, are you here at the moment?
Yes.
You are.
Yes.
You are with us. Oh, good. We thought you might have been off at another meeting. Do you have a comment that you'd like to make as the representative of NUG on what you've heard tonight?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one single comment that now people in Myanmar, minority, majority, Rohingya, all people in Myanmar are now on the same page. And because of they now understand clearly on the Myanmar military brutalities and atrocities, their mindset. So that is why social cohesion landscape in Myanmar is changing towards the right direction. People apologize and share their sympathy and empathy. So I do think this is a good thing, even in the very hard time.
Thank you. That's very good. And flowing from that and looking at the future, what's the relationship that NUG is able to maintain with Professor Lee and the other people in the SAC-M, etc., those sorts of international groups?
Who are you addressing this question to, Chris?
I was addressing it to Tanong Shui first of all, but I was then going to get your comment on it, Professor Lee.
Maybe Tanong Shui, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah. So as we all know, NUG takes several steps in terms of human rights and democracy. So NUG acting president and cabinet members, they already met Rohingya peoples and their leaders on several occasions. And also, as Professor Lee said, NUG is now reviewing and revising the citizenship law. There will be a guarantee for the human rights as well as democratic principle for the future of Myanmar.
Okay, Professor Lee.
Tanong Shui, I think you meant to say not review and revise because the 1982 citizenship law should be abolished and a new citizenship law should be written based on birth. Yes, based on birth, not ethnicity. Myself and my colleagues at the Special Advisory Council for Myanmar, SAC-M, we maintain close contact, regular contact with all stakeholders. With NUG, we predominantly have contacts with the President's office and the Prime Minister's office in the different ministries, and also with the NUCC, the General Strike, CRPH, and the CDMers. So we are in constant contact, regular constant contact with all the leading forces in Myanmar now.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our hour, so we have to speed up our finishing. But one comment I wanted to make to the questions that there have been so far is about what the Australian government needs to do. We have taken every opportunity that we've had in the Australia-Myanmar Institute to speak to members of Parliament and members of the government about the importance of maintaining priority for Myanmar. Amid all these international crises that I mentioned at the beginning, Gaza, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Myanmar still stands out as something of the highest priority for Australia. Myanmar is, after all, a Southeast Asian country in our own region. The others, important as they are far away. It doesn't mean they're less important, but it means that we have to maintain priority for our own region, and I don't think we've done that well enough at all. Now we have the Prime Minister about to go to China. I would like to imagine that the Prime Minister will have in his brief Myanmar as an issue to speak to the Chinese about. And from what I can see of China, the Chinese have done their best to maintain not neutrality as between the NUG and the military administration, but at least maintain contact with the NUG. A lot of governments haven't done that, not anywhere near as well as I would have liked to have seen. So I'd like to see the Australian Prime Minister speak about Myanmar to the Chinese government, about Myanmar as a country in which we have shared regional interests. And I don't see enough of that. And I'd like to see similar discussions between Australia and India. And India is, after all, a country with which Australia asserts a high priority now, higher than ever before. These things flow from each other, and I'd like to see more of that done. But I'd also hope that we might get from you, Professor Lee, and from Chris Sidoti, advice from you about what you think, on the basis of all your consultations and discussions, what we could effectively do. That'd be wonderful. To the criminal court, you mentioned the ICC, Professor Lee. Do you think it's really imaginable that the ICC could get itself involved with Myanmar?
Well, the ICC is so slow in responding to Myanmar, but Prosecutor Khan immediately was in, he has been to Cox's Bazar. But what we're advocating now for, suggesting to the member states of the UN, is to establish an international tribunal for Myanmar, because it's justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied, and the people deserve some justice. And line and the military need to be taken account of. So this is what we are doing, and at the same time, the IIMM was established during my mandate. I have proposed for a independent investigatory mechanism for Myanmar. It has no jurisdiction. It's collecting like 2,000 interviews and data from victims, and perhaps we need to. And this is something we're also been advocating for and pushing at the UN, is to expand the mandate of the IIMM, where it can report on its and make some advocacy work. As of yet, it doesn't have that. So it will go hand in hand, expand the IIMM mandate, establish an international tribunal, so that all the cases, the 2 million plus cases, there is some jurisdiction that can adjudicate on those cases.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that is our time. Unless there's anything very dramatic that anybody wants to raise with us right now, we're going to have to come to the end of our hour. And I can join, therefore, other people who've put into the chat room their thanks to you and to Samuel for very interesting presentations indeed. Thank you so much. And I'm afraid you've been too good. We'll have to call you again.
Okay, anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Thank
much.
you indeed.
So much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
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 Bye
Bye-bye,
bye.
Professor
Jeju
Lee.
Tumbare. Jeju Tumbare.
Yes,
Yes,
bye.
bye.
Thank you. Bye.